Hi there, my name is Dani Beaumont. Welcome to this week's Adobe Muse Jam session. I'm a principal product manager on the team, and I'm going to be sharing this session over Facebook Live as well as using a Zoom screen sharing application. So if you have questions as you go along, if you're on Facebook, go ahead and put it in the comments. I'll try to swing back and take a look at what's going on there. Looks like we're good. Okay. And this is Jam Session recording 199. 198, it turns out I did on the wrong day. So it was on Facebook Live, but it still counts. So this is a session called How Did You Do That Site of the Day? And I think it's actually just kind of a lot of fun. So I do ask when I put the session up if folks have things that they want to learn more about that are in the site of the day. I didn't hear feedback back about specific questions about the approach that was taken. Now, when folks submit their site of the day, there is in the form a question that asks if we can show their work in something like a jam session and if they can include their source file. It never gets distributed outside the team, but it's an extraordinary way for us to regularly see how sites are built. So please, if you do submit your site, trust us, it won't go anywhere, but it's really great to see the source work as well. I've gotten pretty good at guessing about how things are constructed, but I'm constantly surprised and impressed and smarter from the things that I've learned from people in the community. So let me do a quick check of Facebook Live, which, as I said, tends to not really work well for me, and then we'll get officially started. All right. I need an assistant. Does anybody want to? Just kidding. All right. Looks like we're live. Hi, welcome, folks. As I mentioned, I'll keep an eye on comments with Facebook best I can. Looks like we're live. Better turn the volume down. All right, perfect. Hi, everybody. Let's do this. Okay. First thing I want to say is we have a private Muse beta going on. We always do. Sometimes it's quieter than other times, but we have a beta right now. We've changed to a new beta backend. It's the Adobe standard pre-release community, which means we're kind of starting over with a new list of folks that test products for us. We have some incredible features in beta right now. Specifically, I'm going to say this publicly, we have responsive widgets. So the responsive composition widget, the almighty trigger target composition widget, fully responsive, slideshow widget, fully responsive, contact forms with fluid form fields, and some other really amazing beta features. We need your help. We need your feedback on the work that we're doing. It's a major undertaking to convert this composition widget to a responsive widget. I know it doesn't seem it, but because you can nest so many things inside of it, it's pretty tricky. So I encourage you to please come join the private pre-release. If you go to a web browser and just type in the words Muse pre-release, all one word, .com and hit enter, it will redirect you to that private beta. You have to agree not to talk publicly about what you see until we ship, but please come join us. We would love to have your input. More eyes, the better, because it's a big change. And as I mentioned, that's only half of what we're doing. There's another chunk that I'm really excited about. Okay, having said that, for site of the day, I do want to also mention the point of site of the day. As you know, we rapidly add sites here. We pick about 3 a week, and we all have day jobs. It's not our full-time job, but the sites that we choose them for a number of reasons. Some of them are beautiful. Some are maybe attractive, but not beautiful, but they really show Muse functionality well. Because it's a live site and it's a living site, you may view it and it may not look perfect at that moment. We can't really control when we choose a site what happens. And there is report a concern here on the site to let us know if you see an issue with something that someone's showing. But just to put it out there, it's not the world of perfection. It's a world of living, breathing web. And When we do have those there, as I mentioned, some of the sites include source files, and I have some of those for the more recent submissions. If you've not submitted your design, even if we don't pick it to showcase, it informs us, and we like seeing your work. So go ahead and do it if you can. If you have a site that's live, submit it to Site of the Day using this big green button here. All right, enough with the informational messages. Let's start with the first design. I have this one here, Angelo Investments. It's a pretty straightforward, simple site. It's not the most complex ever, but I thought it loaded quite quickly. It's got a full screen image in the background, simple navigation at the top, an about page and a contact page. There's some animations going on here. One of the things that bothers me personally is there are some third-party widgets, we'll look at them today, that allow you to show animation in a scroll effect-like way on responsive sites. A number of the widget developers have built third-party widgets. They're great widgets. They work really well. I encourage you to use them if you want a little bit of interactivity and miss the scroll effects feature for fluid breakpoints. But it bugs me because we need to build it into the product. So trying to get my head around that and learn from the widget developers what has gone well, and do probably a simpler implementation, but definitely offer some animation. But my assumption is, as I look at this site, if we just kind of evaluate what we're seeing, there's navigation up at the top of the page. I've got a logo here. If I click it, I can see in the lower left that it goes back to the home page. There's also an about page and a contact page. As I scroll down, the background stays present. Hold on. The background stays present and doesn't move. And then I have content that appears on the page. What you just saw with these icons is one of those widgets in motion. So this is an animation widget. And as I scroll down, I've already done it once. It was probably play once. If I refresh the page or reload it fresh, notice I've got the animation of the icons, kind of nice and subtle. I did a session this morning talking about some of our future features, and someone asked me, please, was scroll effects dead yet? And I agree. The overusage of scroll effects is overwhelming, but subtle animations and scroll effects for the purpose of really improving the user experience, I think, is terrific. As I progress down on this site a little bit, let's just kind of keep looking. As I mentioned, it's a pretty simple site. Notice that as I get to the smaller breakpoint, the phone layout, it jumps to just a simple accordion menu. So this is probably using our accordion with navigation inside of that. As I click over there, contact form, nice background image. Again, overwhelmingly, I think the trend with web design is simple sites without a lot of heavy data, a lot of heavy text, things of that sort. Once again, notice that the navigation on the desktop scrolls off the screen. If I come on in, I'm not positive about this, but I jump to mobile. Yeah, hold on. I think that's the desktop. There you go. Yeah, it's not pinned. So one thing that tends to be nice is when you jump to a phone layout to actually pin this navigation, because when you're using your hand and you're scrolling on what can be a pretty long page, having the ability to navigate to other pages without having to scroll all the way back up to the top is a good best practice. In this instance, the designer has the contact and about pages at the bottom of the page, so you can somewhat navigate there back up towards other pages. All right, let's just take a look at this one. So as we expected, just a simple 2-page site. I'm going to come in and take a peek at the master. There are multiple breakpoints here, and you'll notice that they're kind of an interesting mix of fluid and fixed. So if I jump out to the largest breakpoint, it's a fixed breakpoint. So the content there basically is not going to, there's no fluid width. I'm going to kind of reverse engineer to see a little bit of what they got going on. As I press and drag from that fixed breakpoint, one thing I do want to mention, I don't mean to be confusing, and life can be confusing in my world, but if you do want scroll effects and you don't want to use a third-party widget, if you define a fixed breakpoint on a page, you can use all the scroll effects you're used to having. We added that capability at the beginning of this year. So just to be clear about that, if I come to the phone layout here and I decided I want the Angelo Investments to have a scroll effect applied to it, because I'm on a fluid breakpoint, when I go to the scroll effects panel, it won't let me do it. So I wouldn't be able to apply it. To some extent, some people that say things, say that mobile devices is not a place for scroll effects. When you're on a handheld device with slow speeds, you want to be really careful about animations there anyhow. If I jump to the next largest breakpoint, I'm now on what's more of a tablet size. Notice that it doesn't have the little arrows. If I right click, I can see that it's not set to fluid width. What I can do is select the Angelo Investments logo here and apply a scroll effect if I'd like. I can come in and pin that object. I can have it fade in or out because it's a fixed breakpoint. I just kind of wanted to differentiate about that as far as when you can have scroll effects and when you can't. All right, back to this person's design. Then we've got 960. Notice that probably the difference is just how narrow everything was getting on the tablet layout, even though this is a fixed breakpoint. I've done a session. Y'all can let me know if we should dive in again on how to build a site that has fluid and fixed breakpoints. I've grown to understand it a little bit more. One thing that you do keep in mind, when you have fixed breakpoints, it gives you the advantage of something like a scroll effect. It also makes layout a lot easier because things are not flowing within that breakpoint. They're very fixed. But one mental thing you'll want to keep in mind is notice if I drag, let's see if I can get guides showing here. There's a lot of guides, but notice something interesting here. This is my breakpoint. It starts at 960 and it goes all the way over to 768. The designer here, I'm sorry, I don't have their name handy, but they drew a line here. And what's important is that when you're using a fixed breakpoint, all of the content within your page has to be inside that smaller breakpoint because it's going to fall away or get clipped if you didn't. Notice as I press and drag here, all of the content is staying within that inner line. When I jump to 768, I'm going to expect that all the content will be at 550 width or less, right? So as I jump here, yep, see how that all of that content stays within the smallest area of a fixed breakpoint. All right, kind of a subtle little nuance there that I sure didn't understand at first until I spent time. Let's go on into the main page. Take a look there. All right, we've got a number of matching breakpoints. So all the breakpoints on the master are here on the page as well. You don't have to do that. You can have less breakpoints. The rule that the team likes to suggest is that when you're working on a master page, you do pretty much want navigation that's appropriate for different classes of devices. So you usually have like a 1200 breakpoint that assumes a desktop design. Perhaps you're assuming someone's going to use a mouse to click through your navigation. You'll usually have something in the neighborhood of 960 or 768 for tablets. And then there's the mobile device. What this designer did, which is excellent, is they did fixed breakpoint, fixed breakpoint, fixed breakpoint, and then fluid for mobile devices. From what I understand, there's not a real absolute. Some, look at the minimum here, 320. I'm not sure which mobile phones still get to 320, but it's kind of like your way to make absolutely sure that everything will fit into a design at 320, right, as your minimum small size, and as large as 550. I think that's reasonable for smartphones like iPhone 7 Plus, let's say. Excuse me. What I was saying, though, is the designer went ahead and put a breakpoint for every single breakpoint that's on the master, and that may or may not be necessary. Let's just take a look together because, as you know, if you've worked with breakpoints, the minute you add them, it's just a level of complexity with content that you have to keep track of that can be a little difficult. So as I scroll down, I've got a browser fill here. I can see that. The designer's using something called Superhero, and it looks like it's a Muse themes widget. So that's allowing just the initial experience as you come along. there's an animation, and I see that there's arrow is here. If I click on that arrow, if I go to graphic styles, this is usually how you tag an animation to an object on the canvas using a third-party widget. So this item has been tagged with a graphic style called arrow. And if I scroll up here, there's a number of widgets from cookie.com. And if I fly this out for a moment, notice that this graphic style name is arrow, and it's set to bounce. Now you'll notice with Cookie, there's a lot of options for animating objects as you work. Muse Themes has them. I know that Muse for You has some. I know that Muse Gain has some. I know that Cookie.com definitely has some. As I mentioned, it's something I feel like we should natively build into the tool, but that's how these animations are taking place. There's a couple more, and they're tagged differently. So we've got services round, for example, and looks like there's 2 of those, maybe a double effect, but that's how these icons are animating. Okay, kind of enough said on that. I don't want to take all of our time on this one, but I'm going to glance and see if there's any questions going on. All right, looks like we just have happy people, which makes me happy. Okay, yeah, we're in good shape. Happy's good, thumbs up. All right, let's take a look at one of the next ones that we have. So can't emphasize enough. Notice how just clean and light this site is. So if I come into the contact page, notice that there's a form here. And that form is pretty wide. As I jump to getting a little bit tight here, jump to the next breakpoint, it's just simplified. It's got just nice, I just really think this is a nice subtle site. So I can come in and click, I can tab between these fields, but I get a very, that's a just, I think a terrific lightweight contact form using just the built-in form features. All right, enough on that. Next one. This is a Dutch website. If I translate it into English, it breaks the layout a little bit. It looks nicer in Dutch, and I think we can rough it. But this is kind of a classic portfolio site. It's a classic portfolio site that A, loads very quickly for a lot of heavy images, and B, is pretty much, I think, entirely built within native Muse. So I don't think there's any widgets that are being used here that come from third parties. So as I come along, you'll notice there's the hero area here towards the top. This designer chose to do the hamburger menu throughout the entire design. So it starts from the desktop layout all the way down to phone. I have perhaps different instances of this navigation, but it's a consistent user experience. Sorry, I know I'm being judgmental as I go along here, but I think part of what we do is talk about best practices on the web, because as web designers, we don't have to code, but we do have to think about design considerations. So there's always a lot of debate as to whether or not a hamburger menu is a good way to hide and show content. The designer probably could have fit all of this in without putting an accordion, but it's a nice handy way to have one set of navigation that works pretty well across the site. So I'm curious to see how many versions of this nav is occurring throughout the design. Notice it's a push menu, so it's pushing the content down. That's just kind of a nice animation using a JavaScript effect that the accordions have within Muse. Many folks don't know it. I think it was pointed out to us. I don't know if we knew it on the Muse team initially, but if you take an accordion and you pin it to the bottom of the page, you can actually expand it and push the content up from the bottom. That can be kind of a really fun technique. I know that Muse Themes has a video tutorial that explains how you can get that done. And also the widget directory, there's a pack of free widgets that, actually not free widgets, but there's a pack, a downloadable Muse site that has about 6 different mobile menu implementations using native Muse features. I'll swing back towards the end of the session and show you where you can pull that down. That's a nice way to look at just trying to use native functionality within Muse to achieve some of these effects. Okay, moving on down. There's basically an area for the portfolio or the gallery. And let me just check and see. how my Dutch is. So maybe that's home. It's translating to English, even though I didn't want it to. Okay. Yeah, there's kind of a lot going on here. We'll check this one out. The portfolio may be using a widget. The landing page, I don't believe is. So as I come down on that landing page, see how when it translates, things get a little funny. I'm going to try to go back into Dutch. So as I come down, I've got a nice grid. Again, the beauty of this grid is that it's going to keep its proportion relatively well. There's something worth pointing out here. So this designer has a number of different images. You'll notice they're different source images. They're cropped really well. The approach that the designer's taking here is something that you have to do with responsive design, and I think there's kind of good reason for it. If you look at this lens that's here, I could choose to scale that lens both height and width, but if I do that, it's going to end up moving up on the page. Let me see if I can explain this, and maybe we can just do this together in the design. I'm going to wreck this design a bit. But if the designer had chosen to say scale height and width, this image here, every time I roll over it, it kind of fades out. But this image would end up scaling at a different pace, basically, given the space, than this one would. So the grid would be broken. So instead, what the designer's done within reason, so within up to a point where you're not going to have too much of a broken breakpoint, if I come in and press and drag, notice that it's fixed right now. Things are centered, but nothing is scaling at all. Press and drag a bit until I get to just a nice little spot. Notice that the designer's preserving the white space around all of these images, which is fab. As I press and drag, something starts to happen. And what's happening is, within range, it's doing just resizing, so scaling the content in width. Let me see if I can make this stop. Do not. Why won't you let me undo that, silly game? Never translate Dutch. Okay, the Netherlands is safe now. Okay, so basically within reason, this is set to fluid width, but not fluid height. So the images are not getting any shorter. They're just getting narrower in width. And that allows this designer to retain the grid. Now, when things start to get a little funky to where the crops are just not making as much sense, the designer went in and boom, jumped to the next breakpoint where that same behavior happens. But notice that the grid is subtly restructuring. So we've got 4 across now. We jump and it's 3 across. So good reason to add breakpoints, and that behavior occurs throughout the whole area. If I roll over any of these, notice that there's the word graphic design, presentation design, books, drukwerk. We can see how I lived in Holland for 3 years, and I spreek Nederland klein beentje. What does that mean? Just a little bit, but that one's in English, which is funny, which is what Dutch is all about. It's kind of a mix of German and English. All right, stay on task, Dani. If I were to click on any of these, what you've got is a simple rollover. I wish that Muse had a better approach for rollovers, and I think when responsive design occurred, it made this really hard for us. But chances are the rollover is an image, and the image is an image. So I've got an image here. When I roll over, it's probably done in a photo manipulation app where that image has an overlay of text. I could be wrong. It could just have opacity set with text overlaid, but let's see. I don't think there's an easy way to do that in Muse without having a lot of trouble with your responsive layout. So we'll take a look. When I click in, notice in the URL, it takes me to another page. I kind of have an opinion about this. Sometimes folks will have widgets that allow you to have a full gallery on one page. The concern there is if you look back at this design, if this were a Lightbox widget, let's say, where all of these products, all of these images went to a Lightbox instance that had a lot of text and images, you just want to keep an eye on how heavy your pages are. This site loads really lightly because I think each portfolio page is probably a unique page onto its own. Again, I haven't looked at this yet. I'm trying to make a fool out of myself and guess, but let's see how I do. So if I click into graphic design, for example, it's taking me to another page where there's a nice write-up. As I press and drag, I can take a look at just the layout. So we have fluid breakpoint. We have an image on the left. The image is set to fluid width once again, so not fluid height. You'll notice that text and images, they handle the world differently. So it's kind of challenging to keep these guys together. I've got a nice image here that is fluid in width. I've got text that as a column is getting narrower and moving down on the page. So the consequence to that is I get a bit of a gap here in my design. Not too troublesome, but notice that the gap increases until you jump to another breakpoint. So if you want to execute something like this, a really good way to overcome the gap issue, which I think is just a function of responsive design, would be to just drop breakpoints in a little bit more frequently. So as this designer did, you've got a gap and then it jumps. There's nice persistent navigation here. This is really terrific. I can go back to the full example of all the designs. I can go to a previous design or a next design. So if I'm traveling through this person's work, I can just jump to the next page, the next project. And once again, it's loading separately. It'll load quickly and lightly because it's in isolation on its own. Notice that I go from a side-by-side layout with the text and the image over to a nice stacked where the text is interwoven with the images. All right, let's take a look at the source. Dani, you lied. None of that was true. Let's go see. All right, wrote media. I sure hope I have the source. I think this is it, believe it or not. Maybe not. Let's just see. All that lead up for nothing, Dani. Let's double check real quick. I think we might be okay. I think I'm looking at something a little different. Let's dig into this guy. We're done with this one. My goodness. Okay. I think I'm going to pull a fast one on you. Let's see what we've got. A silence fell on the crowd. Let's dig into this source one. Let's try this first. I'm going to preview the entire site in the browser. If this is not the same designer, I apologize, but it's kind of comparable in its structure. So I think we can get pretty close. Nothing like exporting an entire site with company. Just glancing at questions while I'm sitting here. Some of the third-party widgets should be native. Jay, you're absolutely right. I agree. I'm trying. We've got 1,200 widgets. No matter what, the team's never going to make all of those native, but we sure could give a leg up to some of those widget developers just to allow them to more deeply integrate with the product. I'm lobbying for that right now, and I don't give up easily, so we'll keep working. This exporting is going to take a while, so I'll keep answering questions. Now you see why we don't make Cupcake responsive with so many different size boxes. I'm not sure what cupcake is. So you guys can tell me, because Jay was thinking the same thing. Jan, if you want to watch recordings, Facebook Live will play back. There's a video section on Facebook Live. Also, if you search for Adobe Muse on YouTube, I have a channel, and all of these recordings are posted there, so you can watch it later. Something tells me Cupcake Live is responsive. All right, guys, you lost me. So single page with anchors or multiple pages. Let's just see. We've got a lot of missing fonts, but we'll be okay. The single page versus multiple pages, it's, if you ask me, it's a simple answer, which is how heavy is your site? If you were looking at a portfolio site, so you had lots of portfolio pages with thumbnails, it would be a really heavy load. Muse tries to load the appropriate resolution for the device that you're looking on, so it will automatically subsample content. If you go to a smaller breakpoint, it will load the images on that breakpoint, not any other images that might be hidden, but it's probably a matter of performance as you go along. This is definitely a different designer's work, but I think it's somewhat comparable. So we have, once again, a latest work section. As I roll over, we have rollover instances. The only way to do this in a way that, as I notice that this designer takes a different approach also, I'm just going to point it out. So instead of having fluid width with fixed height, the designer's scaling both height and width for a fashion. So as I come in here, it's getting both shorter in height and narrower in width, which allows you to keep your containers together a bit more. And then they're just jumping to a stack of thumbnails. The only way to achieve this rollover, is what I'm saying, is pretty much to have a photo in Photoshop and then have text that you flatten pretty much and then link to the gallery page. So here within the design, I've got a hamburger menu. This is a push menu that allows me to navigate. Again, not the most high-end design, but I like the functionality that I'm seeing. We've got, once again, a nice portfolio page that has descriptions and images that are here. Different content, obviously. I can go back to the top of the site. I can jump to the next portfolio or a previous portfolio. So nice navigation as I jump through here. So good. I'm not a big fan of not having any navigation at the top, nothing persistent to allow you to kind of jump away or get back where you were. But that's a design choice, of course. And then a contact form. All right, I'm a little disappointed that I don't have the other one handy. I may be able to grab it towards the end. This was another site. Let's go take a look at it in its finished sense. This guy. So this one is using a lot of scroll effect animations by way of a third-party widget, a ton. It's a little busy, if you ask me. I mean, there can be a time where I don't know that it's helping the viewer learn more about your products to have too many animations. Notice again, you can animate once on load and then not animate. So we make things happen is there. If I scroll up or down on the page and then go back up, notice it doesn't animate over again. So choosing to animate once to give that first impression, I think, makes a lot of sense. But then not playing it over and over also makes sense. Yeah, it's got a little music too. It's just a fun, playful site. Again, I think a little over the top with some of the animations, but just a nice, clean, structured design. There's a widget here that allows you to include chat. So there are third-party widgets that include that as well. I have had a lot of coffee today, and I think I'm talking awfully fast. So I'm going to pause for a minute and see if you guys have questions that I can answer as we go along here. If not, I'm going to dig in and start dissecting these sites a little bit more. So Rogerio is asking if there's an upgrade on forms, like more options. The hard part with forms, it's a few things. One is forms absolutely need things like a drop-down box, right? We don't have a drop-down box. Folks want to have a browse for file option. That is a tricky concept. if we give you a form that allows you to include a browse button that allows people to attach a file with the upload, the question is, where does the file go? Does it upload to your hosting platform? Do you have a bucket there? Do you go get the downloadable file by FTPing into your GoDaddy account to pull down whatever it is that was uploaded to you? Because we don't have a back end that's forced with Muse, because there's so many back ends that are out there, we have that disconnect around uploading content. I personally use a widget that allows you to include a button that takes you to a Dropbox folder. It's called Drop It To Me. I don't know if I paid for it. I don't think I did. And when you submit a widget description, not the actual widget, but for site of the day or for widgets, actually not site of the day, for any widgets that you upload that you want included in the widget directory, there is a Drop It To Me button that's in a Muse contact form. So it's not, the downside is that it's not integrated. You have to go get a separate widget and add it in. The upside is that I have a Dropbox account. It's isolated. If someone wants to attack it, and I'm not asking people to do that, by the way, but if someone wanted to attack that, it's isolated on Dropbox. Dropbox worries about whether or not there's a virus on their servers. So I don't have to worry about that. So that's a bit of my excuse around contact forms. But what other things are missing from contact forms? Let us know. I said it, drop-down menus, not there. I think forms can turn into surveys if you're not careful. I don't know if Muse needs to go in the direction of complex step-by-step surveys that as decisions, a decision tree bit. But I think that we could do better and do more, and people do it anyhow. So send me emails, Dani@adobe.com, and let me know what your thoughts are if you need more contact forms features. Okay, I'm scrolling along and reading what's going here in the list. Okay, it's a little quiet. Chat's quiet in Zoom, so let's dig in a little bit more. I still want to go get my hands on this site. All right. I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and look at a site that I looked at last week. I think I mentioned that I showed up a week early for a session, and I went ahead and went with it on Facebook Live. But it was a nice design. Somebody told me after that it was actually based on a template, which is okay. We have no way to really keep up with all of the templates that are out there. We try to ask that people not give us full-on templates that they haven't really customized at all, but we can't really control it too much. All right, give me a second to clean this up just a little bit. All right, so this was called Press the Letter. Make small talk, people. I'm digging around for a file. Been there. I don't know. Can it be a long day and only be 1 in the afternoon already? All right, I'm just going to play a little bit. I'm going to start to build this guy. So let's go into this site. I just want to show you how this approach is handled. Okay, and we're going to be a little weird and mean. I'm just going to grab some elements and see how I do. Probably won't go perfectly well, but I'm going to try. Okay. I just want to show you how you set up a grid like this. So if I were to build out this site, because I have 20 minutes and you people aren't asking any more questions, although Jay wants native responsive tools. Jay, go join the private Muse beta, museprerelease.com. Oh, Yosin needs responsive widgets. Go join the beta, museprerelease.com. Okay, sorry, I'll stop. Okay, so if I were to build this site out, right? We're going to leave the hero for a moment, although watch, I'm going to be, we'll see how mean to this I can be. All right, we're going to rough it. Not that roughly, but all right, this is going to be a little silly, but bear with me. I'm just going to capture this in a lazy, bad way. And I'm going to swing over into Muse. We're going to start from scratch. I'm going to do it with about 1,200 pixels, fluid. And then I want to notice this thing right here, right? This is odd. It takes me a while to remember it in some ways. What it says is, although I have a fluid breakpoint, I want you to stop at 1,200. If I do that, then I want you to go on forever. And let me give you an example of it. If I paste that terrible screenshot I just grabbed, and then I'm going to cut it to the canvas, I'm going to come on in and create a container here in the top area. And I'll go ahead and set it to be stretch to browser width. I'm going to change to the pointer tool, right click, and I'm going to paste that as a background image. All right. I'm going to also come in and just tell it to pretty much center and scale to fill the container. Look, it even includes, it's just one of those days, people. Good thing we have a snapshot of me itching my nose in there, which just makes this so much more lovely. Okay. What I've done so far, I'm going to come in and preview the page in the browser. Now you may say, hey, Dani, there's this thing called preview right here. You never use it. You're right, I don't. It doesn't have any navigation, and I trust my browser more than the preview button is using the native operating system's browser. So that would be Safari on the Macintosh. I like to use Chrome and Firefox. So I just preview in browser and then copy the URL to the other browsers. But I've got that first behavior, and I did choose a pretty large size, 1,200 pixels, and I'm on a notebook computer. So I'm going to artificially zoom all the way out and see if things stop. Notice how pretty much no matter how large my screen is, it's getting wider and wider. That can be great, but things can get incredibly distorted if you're on some of the incredibly large monitors that are out there. So actually, this is going to confuse me. Let's look at this. I think it's my overall size, but I'm now obscenely zoomed out. I set it to 1,200 pixels, and it's still spanning the width. Let's try to bring this guy in again for a moment. If we even nudge it here, let's try this approach. Preview in browser. Let's go back into actual size. So what I have is white space now until I get to that 1,200 mark, and then things start to scale. All right, so we got a bit of a start. Next thing, we've got some thumbnails here below. And I want to kind of quickly illustrate the approach to the thumbnails. Jeepers, Dani. Okay, as I scroll on down, we have these images. Now, as I roll over the image, it's not going to want me to steal it of all the things. So bear with me. I'm going to get my screen capture program. And I'm just going to sneak a little capture. Just a portion of this guy. In fact, I'll crop it in. Just want to show this point. All right. Don't do this for real. This is not my site. I don't have the rights to it. I'm just trying to illustrate a concept. So I've got an image here, and I've pasted it on the canvas for now. And when I go to my resize options, notice that I can set it to none or responsive width and height because it is a placed image. As I mentioned, the live site is doing this really terrific vertical squishing while not changing the height. So how did they do that? You might wonder. What they did is came in and created a container. They then went to this image, cut it to the clipboard because I'm being lazy. You can also pull down, if you actually own the image and you haven't stolen it from the web, you can just say file place more appropriately. I've copied it to the clipboard. I'm going to right click here and say paste as a background image. When I do that, interestingly enough, my placed image now has the ability to have responsive width or width and height. So the responsive width behavior is going to allow it to have that horizontal change without changing the height. I'm going to do that one more time, maybe twice more quickly. I don't want to bore anybody, but I want to keep going with this point. Grab that guy. Drop it here. I'm going to be lazy. Duplicate this one. And show you some cuteness. When you know you're working with somewhat of a grid system, I can go to the transform panel and say, keep it the existing width. I want the height to be half of what it is. So divide that height by 2. You can put in multiply. You can put in you can multiply, you can divide, you can subtract here in these fields. So I'm going to say make it half the height. I guess I said half the height and width, but I only want half the height. So I'm going to unlock that. Say half the height, which is pretty good, but I need a little bit white space. I'm going to go just a little bit more. Let's go ahead and drag this down as a second container. Copy this image. I'm going to cut it and paste it as a background image. Let's do that one more time with feeling. Grab this one, copy it quick. And here, paste as background image. And now all of these are fluid width. So if I come in and preview what I got, as I come in and resize within this breakpoint, I'm getting a pretty nice behavior. So I would tighten up this space so that it's equal to these spaces, but it's roughly doing what I expected it to do. The other gotcha, as I mentioned, is that they've got this nice rollover. It's possible, but not probable, that you can do that rollover as a state rollover. Let's go back to the design. So notice I get a nice overlay with words. The way that you usually need to do that is to create a second image. So if I drag this off, or if I try to view, inspect, and try to view the source, I probably can tell that I'm not a coder. But there is an image file here. So it's not text. It's not something, another way to tell without pretending like you know how to code is just if I select all, well, you know, see, this is why it's a jam session. We learn while we teach. It looks like the designer actually does have live text and rollovers. So let's give it a go. If they can do it, I can do it. I'm not convinced though. It's not. See, this is text. I mean, this is graphics, images, I think. If I make it larger, it's somewhat. Okay, what I'm advocating is that you go ahead and save it as a graphic. And then in the tile for this object under the states panel, notice there's a normal. In the rollover state, what you'll want to do is come in and change the opacity, for example. You can lighten it up. You can do a glow. So if I did a white glow here, inner glow, and set it to a certain level of opacity, I can get pretty far along those lines. Let's just see if this is listening to me. I'm not convinced that it is. I need to exaggerate a little bit more, so let's go there. Blur, set it to like a zillion. Pull this guy out. So the inner glow is giving you a bit of an overlay. You can also go in and try another one. If I go under effects here and just say, go ahead and set this to, let me try 70. It's another way to lighten it up. So notice there's the normal state, rollover state goes lighter. The question then, though, is can you actually put text on top of it and have it behave in the same exact way as the images? In my experience, it's hard. So what folks usually do is they'll match up the image with the opacity and text, save that as a bitmap image, come on over to the overstate of the object. In the drop-down fill, they'll go browse for that other image. You've gotten very quiet on Facebook. I've got 9 minutes left. So what I will tell you is go join the beta. 2 weeks from now, I want to talk about high DPI. And that will be talking about 2x image resolution. It'll also be talking about using SVG whenever you can, because it is by definition scalable vector graphics that are accepted by most hosting platforms, most web browsers, and are resolution independent. And I also want to talk about just the idea of breakpoints and images between breakpoints, how to make sure that the load time on something like a smartphone with lower bandwidth is handled. So I'm going to be back here in 2 weeks. And please come check out Site of the Day. Give us feedback on your designs. If you've got support questions, you probably should throw them at the forums, but if you're really stuck, you can send me an email and I will forward it or answer it if I can quickly. I'm Dani at Adobe. Thank you for spending your time in another eclectic jam session. We'll see you in 2 weeks.